Pleasure to be joined now by Lance Zierlein of NFL.com. And Lance, we've developed a really good relationship over the years, and you're somebody that I've always respected. And you're the man behind the 500 plus scouting reports on NFL.com. So I want to welcome you to the Read Option Podcast.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me, Jordan. I appreciate that, man.
No problem, man. Just to give everybody a little background, that I'm running a series called Scouting the Scout. And Lance, you're actually the first person up, so you're the leadoff hitter. So I'm sure you're
Good.
excited about that.
I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So let's dive right into this thing. And you have a well-diverse background, and you're somebody that is well represented in the industry. So how did you get your start in the industry, though?
Well, so I have to go all the way back. I actually started, for me, I was working so I grew up the son of a college, at that time, a college football coach. He was at University of Houston, was his first college job. My dad was at LSU, Tulane, hit a bunch of different jobs. So I'm a coach's son. And anyone who's a coach's son takes, great pleasure in being a coach. Not pleasure, but pride in being a coach's son. And so I always had sports in my background. I was always into broadcasting type of stuff. Like I always envisioned that for myself. I actually envisioned myself as a basketball player. That was my first true love, was basketball. And so I'd skip classes at Tulane and go to the gym and get a run in, man. If we held the court, and I couldn't get to sociology if we had a 4-game win streak going, I wasn't getting a sociology. Right. So basically, what happened was somewhere along the line, I just went and got into like the grind of a day-to-day, everyday job, and that's what it was. And I wasn't in sports. I always knew I was kind of supposed to be in sports. I always had that feel, that draw. I spent a lot of time reading, learning, just not intentionally memorizing stats, facts, all this and that. But it's just kind of what happened. And I was immersed in sports. And so I was working about a 60-hour-a-week job for not much money. And I quit and started my own company, which is actually a handicapping company, like picking winners for people. And I opened up, and I have to go all the way back just to kind of set this up. It's not the draft, but what it did was I knew that was my side door into the sports world. I knew how to pick winners because I used to hang out at in a pool hall sports bar in New Orleans, and I learned from handicappers how to handicap, kind of some seedy guys who taught me the mathematics of it all. Mm-hmm. And also the feel, handicapping is very much there's a feel for understanding value and being analytical. And so that was very important for me, because when I had to figure out the picture of team A versus team B with a point spread, that got me in the mode of being where you have to be objective. Like, you're forced to be objective. You can't develop a negative lens about a team, because you could end up losing money because of that. Right. So or at least for my customers. So what I learned was the ability to be objective, or try to remain objective every single time out. And that really helped me with my draft stuff. But for me, I then started creating my own NFL magazines, like preview magazines, and I would have my mom print them up. And then, because she had a printing background, I'd drive to Louisiana, where she was living at the time, and drive back with 300 magazines and go. And I'd sell advertising to companies. I'd just go hustle. That helped me pay for the printout. And I'd go put a stack of 50 of them in sports bars around Houston. And so what I did was, my handicapping service, Pigskin Sports, was one of the prominent commercials in there. And so I got people to call, and I'd give them picks and things like that. Well, but this whole time I knew it was a side door into sports for me. That's what I wanted it to be. And I ended up getting on different radio stations or radio shows, just wrote letters, hustled, kind of pumped up my resume, made it sound a little better than it actually was, right. As much as I could. And I had a gift for that. Now, it was hard because initially it was, you're just very nervous the first time you do any kind of radio or television or anything like that. But I got used to it over time by doing these, this college football analysis, giving picks. Some stations would just want me to talk, like WQAM in Miami, just talk about the Dolphins. We're just going to talk football and just a little bit of handicapping, which is great for me because I could do that as well. And then from there, I impressed a local guy, a local guy who ran the radio station here, a guy named Dickie Rosenfeld. And he asked me, he said, hey, if you want to come on and start doing a weekend show, I like the way you do your football picks and all that. Do you know other sports? I'm like, yeah. I mean, basketball was my jam back then. And, and the Rockets were in the middle of a run. And so, I started doing weekend shows. So that's really how I got into broadcasting first. I started doing I was doing morning drive time radio starting in 97, where I was very young to be doing that. It was highly unusual. And I've been doing that ever since. Now, the draft stuff came in 2001, the year before the Houston Texans came. I already was into it anyway, but I really got into it in 2001, the year before the Texans were going to be into existence. I'm doing radio. I got to go to the Senior Bowl for the first time in 2001 with Danny Arnold. And Danny is a local trainer in Houston, and I mean, he deserves a shout out because he's one of the OGs in terms of training guys for the combine. Danny has had, and these are guys that I've watched train: Charles Woodson, Peanut Tillman, Julius Peppers, Haloti Nada, Derek Johnson. I mean, real wow. Dudes. Yeah, and those are just some of them. I could keep on going on and on. Casey Hampton, Sean Rogers. So, I mean, he trained he was one of the guys really doing it up, but then, eventually it ended up going into high-end facilities and things like that. But Danny said, hey, why don't you come with me to the 2001, to the Senior Bowl? Why don't you come check out the Senior Bowl? And I thought that'd be great. I mean, I kept up with the draft, not like I do now, but I went and that's when I decided I was going to start my own. I already had a newsletter going called A View from the Sideline, which was just a sports newsletter. But I really started hyper-focusing on football and especially the NFL draft that January of 2001 after I went to the Senior Bowl. And it was unbelievable. The first guy I met there who was like me, just kind of a fan, who was a media member, who was also kind of a fan, and it was Tony Pauline, as a matter of fact. And it was not like it is now. I mean, it's just football people. And so for me, so here I am, a radio host. I'm doing a radio show from the bedroom of my hotel. I'm out at practices because I got a media pass, which back then they're like, yeah, if you want to come cover it, that's fine, I guess. And so I'm out there watching all this. I'm on the field. I'm taking notes with, I feel like a big shot. I'm taking notes, my draft notes with other, GMs and scouts and things like that. And so after that, I was really hooked. I started I created more of a focus on the draft in my sports newsletter, my football newsletter, and it really picked up. I mean, subscriptions, it was like 300, 700, 1,000, up to 3,500. This is just an email newsletter. And so every year after that, I really was digging into the draft more and more and more.
And that's really an incredible. It's really an incredible story. Like, I didn't even know 75% of that about you. So it's really cool to hear that. And you say you really started diving deep into the draft in 2001. So over that time, you've had plenty of chances to sit back and see the lay of the land and really figure out your style as an evaluator, in a sense. So over that time, you've basically been in the game for 20 years now. What would you say is your biggest philosophies or biggest beliefs as an evaluator?
Well, so based on the conversation I just had with you, this isn't going to surprise you. I think you have to be open-minded. And if you are not, I call it cleaning your filters. And all of us are guilty of this. You're going to be guilty of it. I'm going to be guilty of it. Daniel Jeremiah will. Bill Belichick will. Everybody's going to be guilty of bias of some sort. It's impossible to eliminate your bias. You have to be aware of your bias so that you can kind of check it. And that's in all of life. And so when it comes to not handicapping, but scouting, and it comes to draft evaluation, I think, something that I think is very important is when you're watching and you see a negative play, you have to be careful to make sure that filter's still wide open, that your lens is still clear, so that you don't start looking for all of the negative plays, or you don't start dismissing the positive plays. And a big problem can be if a guy had an injury that you didn't know about, and you're watching early in the tape, or maybe you're just watching the very first game and it's a game in week 7, and you're like, God, this guy sucks. I mean, what are people seeing him? And then all of a sudden, you watch another game, and now you're watching for the things that you're already biased against. You're looking for his negatives. You're looking for negative plays, and you tend to set aside the positive stuff you see. Well, if you didn't know he was hurt, and a lot of times that's not going to come out. If you didn't know he was dealing with a toe injury or an ankle injury that he was playing through, then your evaluation will run askew. And so that's why I think it's very important that your lens and your filters, you have to, every time you go to the next game, man, kind of wipe it clean again and see what the guy does in the next game or the next play or whatever the case may be. Don't be overly influenced by a single play or 2 plays. I think that's one of them. Here's another one. Don't scout with your ears. And I know that this was taught to me by Chris Ballard, and Chris was taught that by Jerry Angelo when he was at Chicago Bears. He said, don't scout with your ears, meaning, and this is a big problem that I'm sure you could think of. I'll ask you. Let me ask you this, Jordan. Now I'm going to turn the podcast around on you. So, who is a guy that you can think of that you say, man, I wish I would have had the conviction to stick with what I got too influenced by reading what other people said or hearing what other people said, and then I either pushed them up too far or I pushed them down too far, and I wasn't true to what I knew I saw on tape.
For me, and this is one guy that taught me a ton, and this is back when I first started in 2017, I believe it was Michael Thomas coming out of Ohio State. And the thing that you heard about him was the small sample size. He's not a true route runner. He played strong, but he wasn't very flexible. And I kind of let that cloud my judgment. And that's why I kept Laquan Treadwell over him. And we've seen how both of their careers have really been the complete opposite. So I think Treadwell was a complete opposite of what he was as far as a route runner, and then just having the knack of being able to get open. But I really let the small sample size and what a lot of people were saying about him really deter me from my honest opinion. And that's why I said that entire 2017 receiver class taught me so much, but specifically Treadwell and Michael Thomas.
Yeah, and I think that you just said something that is also in my personal philosophy that you asked me about originally. And it's that you got to study your misses. Like when you hit, yay for me, I hit. Everyone wants to, secretly you want to shout to the world that, look, I hit this guy, I hit on this player. But the reality is no one really cares. I mean, they may give you some props, but then it's on to the next. It's on to the next player. It's on to the next draft. And so the best way to get better, I think, is to really study your misses. Like, why did you miss? And sometimes it takes time because you may feel like you missed early on, but then as after 2, 3, 4 years, that same miss may end up being something that you ended up nailing a player right on. But I think understanding why you missed is very important. Don't try to be right, try to be accurate. If you're trying to be right, then you're always going to make excuses for why you missed, and you're going to say it wasn't a miss, it's this, it's that. Just try to be accurate. If you weren't accurate with your analysis or your assessment, why were you not accurate? And try to go back and figure out what was it that I missed, because you just talked about learning from a draft class and learning from a wide receiver. I do the same thing. I go back and I want to learn why is this linebacker better than I expected? Or why, what did I miss about Pat Mahomes? Like, what is it that, I saw the physical stuff. What did I overestimate? And it turns out I overestimated, the off-platform stuff, the defaulting to it, and the making plays, extending plays to the point where he would make a mistake, but then I'm not thinking about the extending the play part. Like, that's a really big part of it. Right. And the arm talent is really, really special. And so, I'm always trying to learn what I missed. Why did I miss on, what did I see about Nathan Peterman that I like? Because, and what I learned there is I actually saw tape I really liked on Nathan Peterman. But the bottom line is, if you mentally are not tough enough, if you don't have the poise or mental toughness at quarterback, I don't care what your tape looked like. It's really irrelevant because the NFL is just a different league. If you don't have mental toughness to overcome adversity, it really doesn't matter. So those are some of the things that I think. Don't scout with your ears. Really clean that lens and filter so that you're objective from game to game to game for a player, and then study your misses. If you do well, Jordan, LeBron, those guys, they don't work on what they're good at. They work on what they need, to improve. And if there's a position you don't scout well, go talk to other people who do scout it well. Go try to learn from them. Go read up on it. There's stuff you can find all over the internet. There's books you can go read.
And that's really good advice, just because, I mean, we both have Twitter, we have social media, and everybody likes to bang their chest when they get somebody right, but everybody likes to hesitate when they get somebody wrong, and they don't really like to address that. But I want to back up a little bit, and this is something that I've been meaning to talk to you about forever. I forget every time I see you in person. And you tweeted this out, I think it was about a year ago, and that you write some of your scouting reports in red ink. And I can't remember if it was you do the negatives like that or you do the positives like that. So I just want you to go over that philosophy a little bit.
Yeah, so I keep a black ink pen. I live and die with these pens. This is the pen. It's a Pilot. It's a Bic Pilot G207. It's just a very smooth. I go buy an entire thing from Costco, and it's a very, very smooth. It's a very smooth pen, and I like to write down my thoughts. And it may feel old school, but it's just when I'm writing it down, there's something that connects with me. Either it's positive or negative, where a story starts to come alive for me on the player, like who the player is when I'm actually writing it. When I'm typing it, I don't know, I feel disconnected from the player. So as you can see right here, like this is Najee Harris. And so you can see the black and the red ink just right here. And so what I want to do is if I have it in black and red in my initial notes, as I'm scribbling notes as I'm watching tape, this is just stuff I'm writing as I'm watching tape. I think it's interesting when I see a lot of red, and it's supposed to be a player I like a lot, and I'm like, man, I got a lot of red for being a guy that I thought was supposed to like. It kind of puts me in check a little bit when I see that red pop up so much, because I have to go back and look and say, okay, was I being too hard on them? Am I writing up the same thing over and over, which sometime will happen? Or is this maybe a guy, do I need to clean that filter and stop just assuming I'm going to love Najee Harris if I've got negative comments that are equal to or outweigh the positive comments? So that's one of the reasons I like the sensation of seeing the black ink and red ink and kind of getting a visual to visualize it and the feel. But then writing it down for me is important, because as I'm writing it, I'm also thinking of different ways to say things when I have to write the scouting report, because I want it to sound good, and I want it to paint a picture in your mind when you read it. So, the red ink's it's not a big deal, but for me, like I said, I just think it kind of creates a visualization that just makes me take a step back and say, wow, look at all this positive. Like, look at all the black ink. I really like this guy, and everyone's saying he's a 6th-round pick, and I'm not finding a lot of negatives on him.
Right. I just always found that really interesting. And it's something that I've actually wanted to pick up, just because I'm another person that really likes writing scouting reports down. And
Okay.
like you said, it's like writing a story, and it's kind of like writing an essay. And then once you see it all come together, I think you really get a better picture of a player as opposed to typing it up. And I just feel like I can get my thoughts out faster when I'm just writing on pen and paper. So I've always found that really interesting. But I don't want to hold you up too much. I'll give you a couple more questions and I'll get you out of here. So I want to ask you about your best scouting memory during your time, basically 20 years in this business. So I think you're a well-seasoned vet in this industry. So what would you say is your best scouting memory?
Well, I'd say my best scouting memory for me. So remember now, I came up as just a media guy who really enjoyed going from college and pro football stuff into draft. So I was doing college football, pro football, and draft. So that's initially how I started. And then I was one of the early draftniks, I guess you could call it, from the early 2000s, as I was really doing a lot of that kind of stuff, watching what Mel Kiper had to say, reading Joel Bushbaum, reading Pro Football Weekly, and, a lot of the stuff that Nolan Naraki, when he started writing, the things he would say. And but so I just kept coming up and coming up and coming up doing that. When Twitter hit, I met new people that had the same interests as me. And I think for me, my best memory had to be when I was hired by NFL.com and NFL media. The first time I was at Tampa Bay for the East-West Shrine game, staying in being flown out there, staying in a hotel on the water there in Tampa, and then I guess about a month and a half later, flying to Indianapolis for my first inside combine, my first time actually inside the building, and posting up on the field with me and Solomon Wilcots and Mark Istook, and across the way was Money Smith and Bucky Brooks. And here I am literally I've got 3 brand new suits, or like four brand new suits. I had to buy brand new suits for TV. And I'm like, man, I can't believe this is happening. I'm sitting on the turf at a set, and I'm giving analysis of all these players that I'd already watched and written up scouting reports on them. So, and then from there, doing the actual draft, because I gave analysis on every single pick in 2015. Like, I stayed up there doing what Mike Mayock was doing. I was doing it on the digital side, and I could remember every single player. Like, every player that got drafted, I knew him like that. Like, I can't do it now, but at that time I could. So it was kind of crazy, the whole process of being able to kind of be in the room where it happened, so to speak, at the East West, then at the Senior Bowl, which I'd been to the Senior Bowl, but still, it just hit different when you're, with a big entity like NFL. And then having people who are other draftniks on Twitter, it was like they were really excited for me because I was one of them, and I was doing, something that we all wanted to do, and I was a guy that got the chance, and there were people that were really happy for me, and being able to kind of represent those guys who are out there grinding and doing what I was doing, which is just hustling on the side and doing something we loved. And so I've always, I'm getting more separated from that. And there's younger people coming in to Twitter and draftniks every day who don't realize it. I came from the same place that they're coming from. I just hustled, and I had my own website, and I did all that stuff. And I just, through hustling and doing the same thing you do, Jordan, which is going and making introductions and things like that, eventually all that preparation. And I had a tremendous amount of preparation. I'm doing the work, I'm putting the work in too before I got my opportunity. But, when it eventually hits, man, it's a good feeling.
Absolutely. And that's really a great story to share. And I'm a big fan of yours, but I wanted to get your opinion on this before I get you out of here. So with COVID-19, there's a lot going on right now. We've seen how it's affected our industry. And there was some big news yesterday. Virginia Tech cornerback Caleb Farley, who's highly ranked on a lot of preseason boards right now. And, with him, I don't think there were a lot of people that say he essentially needed to play this season to still be what I consider probably a top 50 pick for the most part. There's a lot of people saying he still will ultimately end up being a first round pick. So I just wanted your overall thoughts on what's going on with COVID-19 and then these prospects essentially sitting out the season. And I know there's going to be some guys that get bad advice and feel as if they don't need the season next year. And there's going to be some potential first round picks that end up sitting out this season as well. Farley won't be the last one. We both know there's going to be some other guys that come out of the woodworks and basically opt out of the season. So just what's your overall thoughts on that?
Well, so I don't, this is a personal choice for every player. So certainly they're welcome to make the choice they want to. I'm just going to look at it from a draft standpoint. And if you play a position, if you are a height, weight, speed, if you're a plus player on height, weight, speed, and you play a premium position like corner, like offensive tackle, like quarterback and pass rusher, there's certain guys who the NFL already knows these are going to be guys. I mean, these are going to be first round picks. Now, if you play, you solidify that. You're able to put tape out there. You're able to get your practice habits, established when scouts go into schools and the coaches talk about you. So I think guys who play have a chance to really establish themselves, lock it in, solidify, and make it kind of bring the whole scouting projection together. The guys who sit out, they need to have pretty good 19 tape. If the tape is just average, it's one thing to project a player based on the measurables and the traits and the explosiveness. But if the tape is just okay, I don't think they're going to get big bumps from just okay tape. And I think that's the problem is you kind of hit on it. If the wrong guys sit out, it could hurt their draft stock. Now, if they're doing it, they're not doing it because they're draft stock. They're doing it because they're worried about their overall health or the health of other people. So I totally understand that. But just from the standpoint of when it comes draft day, we're looking at these prospects, we all know what the premier positions are. Those guys always get pushed up. Like a fairly placed cornerback, that gets pushed up if you have some ability and if you're long and if you can run. But other guys really need good 19 tape, and so there's just no way around it. And if let's say 12 potential top 50 prospects sit out and the other guys go, there is going to be a danger, obviously, of other players that we didn't anticipate playing really well, which happens every single year, multiple players. They end up pushing their way into the discussion. And when you got 20 tape and you don't have 20 tape, the guy with the 20 tape is usually going to win out. And I think that's what we could see happen for some players at some positions. But once again, if it's not about the draft and it's about their health, then it'll all work itself out. If you can play ball, you'll eventually get to a second contract. You'll make your money back that you may have lost if you fell in the draft. And, where you get drafted is oftentimes very overrated. It's just stuff for us to talk about. But, right. I mean, the guys who are ball players, once you're in camp, you're a football player. And where you got drafted, it won't matter after a couple of years.
Right, and I think it's definitely a slippery slope. But we, like you said, the guys are the guys. We know, like the Clemson guys, Trevor Lawrence and Travis Etienne, and I'm not sure if you've gotten to them yet. We know what they're going to do this year.
I wrote Etienne. Yeah, I wrote Etienne last year. I thought he was coming out. I gave him a first-round grade last year.
Yeah, I'm right there.
I thought Etienne was so much better on tape than I expected. I kind of knew who he was, but he was a more complete running back than I realized. Mm-hmm. And I was a little surprised he came back. I respect it. He's a grinder. He likes to hustle. He likes to play hard. I know some relation to him here in Houston, and we were talking about it. And I think he was surprised too. He came back, but I know him. If he doesn't play at all, I got his scouting report from last year. I can just submit that. It's a wrap. Yeah. And Trevor Lawrence, I know Trevor Lawrence too. We've seen him in high leverage games too. So,
Right. It's, like I said, it's a slippery slope. But like you said, the guys are the guys. But Lance, I want to open up the floor to you now. If you want to plug anything that you have upcoming on NFL.com, or where can we find you on Houston radio?
Yeah, so you can find me. Actually, there's a couple things. You can find me at ESPN 97.5 in Houston radio. I've got a podcast, actually, I do with an actor out in L.A. We do sports and movie stuff. His name is Eric Layden. He's been on all kinds of, Big Love, Mad Men, American Sniper, Boardwalk Empire. He's been on a lot of stuff. You might want to check it out. We have a lot of fun with that.
I will.
We've had the guy who plays Doug Stamper on House of Cards, Michael Kelly. He was on. We just interviewed just yesterday the director and the actual subject of the documentary Outcry, where a guy was jailed, a high school football player who was going to go to UTSA was jailed for something that he didn't do, and he got out after 3 years. And
wow.
He's 25 years old right now, and he's actually working to try to be he's 217 pounds, can run about a 4.48, and he's working to try to walk on at University of Texas. His name is Greg Kelly. We talked to Chris Ballard. For about an hour about a lot of stuff as well. So you can find a lot. If you like movies and you like sports, we got a lot of that going on. That's called Off Script. And type that in with my name, and it'll pop up and you'll find it.
Definitely will be checking that out. I know you and Chris are really close, so I'm sure that discussion got really, really intense.
Yeah, it's it's funny. He likes to mess with me. We give each other crap back and forth from time to time on Twitter, and he was a guy that really I consider a mentor. I don't get to talk to him as much now that he's GM. He's got a lot on his mind. I would say this. I do want to say for all of the young scouts or older scouts or whatever, people who are draftniks who want to be scouts and want to do something more or just want to be great in the space that you are right now, the one thing I would tell people is watch as much NFL football as possible. And I know it's kind of counterintuitive. You think, well, wait, you got to watch all the college players. But if you don't know what NFL starters – and this is a problem for NFL scouts who work for teams. If you don't know what a good starter looks like, an average starter, and then a marginal starter, but a starter nonetheless, if you don't know what that looks like in the NFL, you can't be good or great at scouting college players. You have to know what they're supposed to look like. So spend a lot of time watching NFL football, because ultimately that's what you want it to look like when you're watching your college players and you're trying to project what they're going to look like.
Right. And I don't want to go on a tangent here, but I've said this plenty of times on Twitter that you can watch a million draft prospects, but if you don't know what it's supposed to look like, and not just the elite players, watch marginal or medium level players, and then
They
watch
make
players that
teams
aren't.
too, right? They make
Right.
rosters too.
Right. It's important, very important to watch those positions just so you can know what the baseline requirements are to be successful at the position, and then what the best of the best look like. I think that's very important too. So I'm really glad that you said that.
And I want to say one more thing too. This is
Go ahead.
really good. I think this is really good advice too. And this actually came from Jerry Angelo. The very first year I was writing, I knew Jerry a little bit. Chris Ballard had introduced me. So it's 2015. I'm at the East-West Shrine game, and I'm talking to Jerry about all these players I've been doing. And he said something very important at that point, and I realize it's pertinent now for everybody to understand if you want to be good at this. He said when he used to tell his scouts, who included, Chris Ballard, don't tell me what a player can't do. Don't spend as much time on what he can't do. Tell me what he can do, because we can all find what a guy can't do. And ultimately, a guy's success in the league or ability to play in the league is going to be defined by what he can do. Now, if you find that he can't do much, he ain't going to play. But if you spend all your time talking about what a guy can't do, but you fail to mention that he can bust ass as a gunner on special teams, on kickoffs, and as a gunner. You don't talk about the fact that he's very, very fast, even though he doesn't have great instincts. You need to focus on what a guy can do, because that ultimately can define what they are capable of in the NFL. Where if you only focus on what they can't do and you fail to mention what they can do, that's how you end up missing on guys.
Absolutely. That's really good advice. And I'm glad you had to pick me up there, just because I forgot the entire segment about giving some advice to younger scouts. So I'm glad that you had
I scouted
that.
your scouting notes for scouting me.
Don't mark my draft grade down too much for that. So I appreciate you, man. You're like somebody I consider the godfather of the industry outside of Mel Kiper. You're not as old as he is, so
No.
you're not quite.
Mel's a good dude, though. Can I tell you this?
Yeah.
Mel was a really good
Absolutely.
dude. When I met Mel in 2000, I taped something with him for a draft thing I was doing back in 2010, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
And Mel was a really good dude. And even when I got into the league, like, Mel has never been a jerk to me. I can't find anybody who has something negative to say about Mel. So I know Mel's not the hip, the up and coming draft guy, and Mel's been the OG who's done it forever. But Mel is a good ass dude. Like, I want to make sure people know that he is a real dude, a good dude, and he does put time in and put work in too.
So this is a quick story that I'll tell you real quick. So there's like a local thrift store here. I'll stay in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, which is right outside, right by Wake Forest. And I walk in the thrift store and they have like this book section, and there's like a large stack. I'm like, man, what are all these blue books back here? So it comes to find out it's every blue book that Mel Kiper wrote. And I'm sure you've read through a whole bunch of them.
I've seen them.
He's had these blue books that he has written, like going back to like 1997. I think that was like the first one. And he did it all the way up into, I believe, the Andrew Luck year. So like 2012. So there's a thick stack of all of them back there. And I'm like, man, all these for $15? Oh yeah, I'm in. So I just grab every single one. So this summer I've just been diving knee deep in all that stuff. So I picked up plenty of lingo and just talking how Mel talks, and he was just so far ahead of the curve, man. It was so incredible, just like how far ahead of the curve that he was.
It's kind of crazy that Mel, like, where did he get it from? Like, who was the guy that influenced him? Because the guy that's really another guy that is super OG is a guy named Joel Bushbaum, if you don't know who that was, with Pro Football Weekly. Yep. Dude, Joel was crazy. So my dad was coaching at University of Cincinnati, and he had Jason Fabini, who was a tackle who played for years for the Jets, started for the Jets, but he was a tackle at University of Cincinnati. And my dad used to always get Pro Football Weekly, and Joel Bushbaum was the guy who would do all the write-ups for these players. And he's reading Jason Fabini. He's like, I don't know how he knows this. Like, he knows exactly Jason Fabini. And I think a lot of it was he used to hustle and talk to coaches and talk to the scouts and evaluators and get their thoughts and then use that, which, that's him hustling. He didn't have the access, and he used to tape as many games as possible and watch them. But I'm always curious how Mel Kiper and Joel Bushbaum, like, man, how did they come up with,
Right.
how did they come up with lingo? How did they come up with, because their lingo they were using was scouting lingo that was already inside the actual business itself.
Mm.
But where did they pull it from? Like, where did they get that from? Who was the guy that really helped Mel Kiper to become who he was, or was he just completely self-made? Because he was so far ahead of the curve, it's
Right.
ridiculous.
Absolutely. It's always interesting, man. Like I love sitting down and just listening to Mel talk, even going back to when he was doing sets at the draft many, many years ago. I just love hearing him talk, man. And like I said with you, man, I could talk draft with you all day long,
I
but I
love
know
it. I love it.
you're very busy. You've always been generous to me, and we've talked about prospects, even going back to the Senior Bowl. Like, hey, man, what do you think about this guy here? I remember talking about Dalton Risner a couple of years ago at the Senior
Yeah.
Bowl. So that was always interesting. But I want to thank you. You're somebody I definitely look up to. That's why I always to make sure to stay in contact with you. But I always appreciate you taking time out your busy day. I know you're knee deep in a lot of these prospects. So thank you so much for taking time out your busy day to join the Read Option podcast, man. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, keep grinding, keep working hard, Jordan. I'm proud of the work you're doing, man.
I definitely appreciate it, Lance. Thank you, brother.